Monks come with proficiency in simple weapons and short swords, and that's it. No armor proficiencies whatsoever, but that's okay because they do get something called unarmored defense. So instead of just adding your dexterity modifier to your armor class, you add your wisdom modifier as well. Now, since we're down at the class features, let's look at the rest of them. So martial arts dexterous attacks. Attacks with monk weapons. Now we have to actually look at this because, and this is one of the reasons I'm actually doing the monk first and just an introduction to monk, is because we haven't had any experience with it during early access. So monk weapons are those with which the monk has proficiency, and it doesn't matter where the proficiency comes from, and which do not have the two-handed weapon or heavy properties. So we cannot use a greatsword and have it be a monk weapon. We can't use a glaive or a halberd. But it does, very interestingly, does include versatile weapons such as a longsword or warhammer, let's say. Anyway, if we're using a monk weapon, we can use dexterity instead of strength, which is maybe why you'd want to use a longsword, because when you're using it with two hands, it's not two-handed, but when you're using it with two hands, it is 1d10 damage. Then we have deft strikes, attacks with monk weapons, and unarmed attacks. That's probably the important part for now. Deal 1 to 4, 1d4 bludgeoning damage. This goes up as you level up, not every level, but at certain levels, unless the damage is normally higher. And that's fine because let's say you've got a quarterstaff, right? The monk starts with a quarterstaff. It will do the 1d8 damage plus the dexterity modifier. Then we also get bonus unarmed strike after making an attack with a monk weapon, or while unarmed, you can make another unarmed attack as a bonus action. So even from level 1, you can be making 2 attacks per turn. One with your weapon, or unarmed, and the second one has to be an unarmed attack. Unarmed attack isn't particularly strong, but it all adds up. It all really does add up. And then we also, from level 1, which isn't the same as 5th edition, we get Flurry of Blows, which requires a key point, a special resource unique to monks. Instead of making 1 unarmed attack, you can make 2 with your bonus action. Interestingly, you can use Flurry of Blows without having made an attack with your melee weapon first, but you cannot just do a single unarmed strike without having used your monk weapon first. That does mean you can use your bonus action and a key point to do 2 unarmed attacks, and then your action to do something else if you wish. Now, before I take a look at the races, I do just want to say this will only cover really the first 6 levels and kind of where you get up to during the first act. That's because I've been using my review time to be playing a monk and just a monk. I haven't really played anything else. So all of the experience that I've got at the making of this video, which is before the full release, is from playing through Act 1 with a monk. So when we're looking at the races, one of the things we can be looking for is actually any weapon proficiencies that we wouldn't normally get. So elves, wood elves and high elves, both get access to longsword proficiency. The others, the longbow isn't so important. I haven't done very many ranged attacks. I do use it sometimes, so having longbow proficiency is a good thing. And also there are some magical weapons, and it might be good to be proficient with the longbow. Out of high elf and wood elf, I'd probably go with wood elf because it gives us extra movement speed. We're going to be getting extra movement speed anyway, but if we can stack it up, the more you can stack it up, the better. And with wood elf, we also get extra proficiency with stealth. If I was going to pick a cantrip, maybe friends, perhaps, maybe minor illusion. So there is another way to get that. And without giving anything away too much, light was actually a pretty decent choice. Tieflings get you spells rather than weapon proficiencies. So maybe you want to pick up a tiefling instead. However, you're unlikely to be using an attacking cantrip, such as Asmodeus Tiefling is getting access to produce flame, because you really want to be using your action normally for your weapon attacks, because they do more damage. Drow can be a good choice. Instead of having a longsword, you get a rapier, which monks don't usually get access to, and it's one-handed. Also, you get access to hand crossbows, which could potentially be useful because you can still use those with your offhand attack, with your bonus action. And you still do get your dexterity modifier added to the damage done by hand crossbows. And we also do get access to some spells. Also, all types of elves, I forgot to say it earlier, means you can't be put to sleep magically, which is pretty useful early on. Humans don't do so well. We get light armor proficiency and shield proficiency, but monks don't really want to be doing that. They lose their unarmored movement, which is kind of one of the big things about monks, is the fact they're very mobile. I can zip around from one place to another, wherever they need to go. I would usually avoid wearing armor, but there are some good items that maybe you want to give up that movement speed and you do want to have the magical item instead. Githyanki gets us long swords importantly. I mean, sure, you could wield a great sword, but it's not going to be a monk weapon. Also, you astral knowledge, I really quite like it. Gain proficiency in all skills of a chosen ability until long rest, and you can change this every long rest, so you can decide, okay, for this adventuring day, I'm going to be proficient in all of the intelligence skills, or maybe all of the charisma skills, whichever one you want. It's really, really, really powerful. In early access, you got proficiency with a single skill permanently. I think this is potentially stronger because you can give yourself permanent proficiency in, let's just say, the charisma skills if you wanted to. We also get mage hands, which can be useful, actually. It's quite nice to have. Dwarves. Dwarves are interesting because they give us Warhammer and Battle Axe proficiency, both of which are versatile, so you can be dealing 1d10 damage or 1d8 in a single hand. And looking at the sub-races, here, Dwarven Toughness is great. You're on the front lines. You're going to be getting hit, so this is going to help you survive longer. Shield Dwarf, proficiency with light and medium armor. I'd probably avoid that. Dwergar, advantage on saving throws against illusions and against being charmed or paralyzed. And this is quite good because you're probably going to be having a half decent wisdom as a monk, and then with advantage, you're starting to get a decent chance to resist these effects. Half elves, for monks, I would say avoid it. Just go for the elves. I haven't said it yet, but any race from a role-playing perspective, obviously, if you're doing it purely for roleplay, you pick whatever race you want. This whole section is probably pointless for you. But we do get Fey Ancestry. And Dark Vision, which is pretty good. You can pick a cantrip, get proficiency in stealth, extra movement speed, or get your drow magic if you want your drow magic. Halflings, one downside to halflings and gnomes and dwarves, I didn't mention it earlier, is their base movement speed is 25 feet. In a way, that's not really too much of a problem as a monk because you will be getting lots of bonuses to movement speed. The fact that you got 5 feet less to move, most of the time won't come up. Admittedly though, when it does, it will be annoying. So lucky, you won't necessarily see this come up a lot, but it will affect your game. When you roll a 1, on attack roll, ability check or saving throw, you can re-roll the die and must use the new roll. That's pretty good, but this usually happens automatically in the background, so you don't see it, but it will be there. And advantage on saving throws against being frightened, that's fine. It's a nice little extra thing there. Now, advantage on stealth check, this is different from early access. This used to be proficiency in stealth, but now it's like the deep gnome. Advantage on stealth checks, that's really strong. And the Strongheart Halfling, advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance to poison damage. It's nice to have an innate resistance to some damage. It doesn't come up like all the time or anything, but when it does, you're thankful for it. Gnomes are going to be good for any class because of the gnome cunning. Advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. That's just great all round. We have Dark Vision. Here we've got expertise and history. That's okay, I suppose. It comes up. All skill checks do come up. I'd probably prefer one of the others personally. Forest Gnomes are good because we get Speak with Animals. We can cast it once per long rest and it lasts until long rest, so basically permanently we can speak with animals. And Deep Gnomes, as I already mentioned actually, have advantage on stealth checks. That's really good. And we have Superior Dark Vision, which is Dark Vision up to 80 feet instead of the usual 40. Dragonborn, these don't mesh particularly well with monks because by using the breath attack, we are missing out on our weapon attacks. But of course, if you want to have a breath attack, you have to pick Dragonborn. But you do get resistance to a type of damage of your choice, depending. Well, I suppose it depends on the type of Dragonborn you are, what subrace you are. I've got to say though, Dragonborn kind of look the coolest, but they don't do much for the monk, if I'm honest. And lastly, Half Orc. So Half Orcs get Dark Vision, Relentless Endurance. If you reach 0 hit points, you've regained 1 hit point instead of being down. This has actually already saved me. I've been playing on Tactician, and I got hit 2 critical hits in a row for like 50 damage. Stop them from going down. And Savage Attacks, when you land a critical hit with a melee weapon attack, your damage dice are tripled instead of doubled. This is good. Unfortunately, this doesn't apply to the unarmed attacks because they're not actually weapon attacks, so we don't get that doubled. For my first playthrough, I have actually been using a half-orc monk. And we also do get proficiency with Intimidation, which is kind of been nice as well. Kind of been nice. For your backgrounds, this is mostly roleplay. Your background affects what gets you inspiration and when you get inspiration. Also, do keep an eye on the skills because if you do overlap a skill, you don't get any different skill. You don't get to change it. So if I change the soldier here as a half-orc, I've got 2 sources of intimidation proficiency, but that means nothing. It means I just get it once. There's no expertise, there's no just choose a different proficiency. So I would actually double check your background with your race to make sure you don't have any overlapping proficiencies. And then it comes to your abilities. Your attack rolls are going to be using dexterity, assuming you're proficient with the weapon, so it is a monk weapon, whether you want to or not. You could use strength or have a high strength. but you're really relying on dexterity for your armor class, so I would avoid having strength as your main stat, as it were. Would be going for dexterity. As a melee combatant, you do want to have a half decent constitution. I put mine at 14 in the end, and wisdom affects your armor class plus a few other skills and abilities, so you do not want to be dropping wisdom at all, which monks are one of the more mad classes, multiple attribute dependent or multiple ability dependent, that you need dexterity and you also need constitution and wisdom. 3 different stats to keep you up there. We can just about do it. In my playthrough, I did put my dexterity at 17. This is because when we got to level 4, I actually picked a feat that gave me +1 in dexterity and something else. I'll get to that when I get to level 4. Now, whether you want to dump stats is up to you. I know some people don't like dumping charisma, say, on their own character because they're worried about conversations. But you can afford to have, I would say, 2 14s, 17 in dexterity, an 8, a 10, and a 12, or 3 10s. This will be up to you. Having a higher strength lets you carry more and jump further, which is actually something very important for monks, and I'll get why that is very soon. Make your monk however you want to make them look like. This video is purely about the mechanical aspects of the monk, nothing about the cosmetic aspects. Before I show you level 2, I do just want to show you the monk in action at level 1. Thanks to Withers here, we can respec, so I can go back and test things out on this dummy. So I'm going to go to turn-based mode. So we can see here, I can use Flurry of Blows, so use my bonus action and a key point to do two unarmed attacks. And then I'm free to use my action to do whatever I want. Now at level 1 I don't really have very much, but I could if I wanted to, I don't know, disengage. Let's go to the next turn, or a mental turn. Now if I attack the dummy with my main hands, I then get the option to use the unarmed strike without having to use a key point. At level 1, we start with 2 key points, and at every level we get 1 extra key point. Then at level 2, we get some extra health, 1 extra key point, and we get the start of our unarmored movement. So while we're not wearing armor or using a shield, we get an extra 10 feet of movement speed. So even from level 2, even if you were a gnome, you're going to have 35 feet movement speed. That's pretty good. And then we get 3 other uses of a bonus action. We get patient defense, so attack rolls against you have disadvantage, and you have advantage on dexterity saving throws, but that uses your bonus action. Step of the Wind dash, I really like this one. Double your movement speed, brilliant. Jump no longer requires a bonus action. It still requires movement, but doesn't require a bonus action. And then Step of the Wind disengage. Instead of doubling your movement speed, you can disengage. And then jump also no longer requires a bonus action. So I'm going to accept that. And instead of showing you monk level 3 straight away, because there's some very important choices to be made, I'm going to come back to camp. So now my movement speed is 40 feet. And I want to show you a Step of the Wind dash. I've gone to turn-based mode to show you what you could do in a combat. So now my movement speed is 80 feet, and I still get to use my action to do whatever I want. So I can get all the way over to here. That's pretty good. Jump no longer requires a bonus action. My jump distance is 15 feet, so for spending 10 feet of movement, I can actually go 15 feet. And there are ways, and basically items, that can increase your jump distance and a feat. So now, even with just jumping alone, I can get all the way over to here instead, which is pretty cool. This is one reason why having actually higher strength as a monk would be very useful, because you can get around the battlefield much more easily. Although it seems a bit silly of jumping everywhere, you'd be silly not to do it. So leveling up to level 3. And do bear in mind, any choice you make, you can go back and respec it with us like I have been doing. And I will have to do to show you all of these subclasses. So first of all, more health, another key point. Deflect missiles. Use your reaction to reduce the damage from a ranged weapon attack by 1d10, plus your dexterity modifier, plus your monk level. If the damage is reduced to 0, use a key point to deflect the missile. I think every time this has actually been used, I think I've always had the option to deflect the missile, because the ranged attacks, the arrows that are incoming, don't do a huge amount of damage. And you do get a choice whether to use this deflect the missile or not. You don't have to use it. So if you want to conserve your key points, you don't have to use it. If you want to change your subclass, you click up here and we get the 3 choices. Wear the 4 elements pretty much lets you pass some spells using key. Wear the open hand is your traditional kung fu. I'd say mostly focused purely on damage. Wear the shadow, as described in other places, basically is a ninja. Get hide as a bonus action instead of an action, which is awesome. Then we can cast Pass Without Trace, so +10 to stealth checks, Darkness, Dark Vision, and Silence, so basically sneaking around, all to do with darkness, and also the Minor Illusion cantrip, which is very useful at kind of gathering people together. As Way of the Open Hand and Way of the Shadow, you don't have to make any choices. I'm going to start with Way of the Four Elements. So we get 3, it calls them spells. Alright, so some of these are obviously just current spells, just renamed. So Blade of Rime is Ice Knife, just renamed. So you choose a target, you make an attack roll against them. You shoot ice at your target, they make a dexterity saving throw. It hits them for 1d10 damage, and then there's a small radius of 2d6 cold damage. It's pretty cool. Causes and creates some ice on the ground, actually creates an ice surface. Fangs of the Fast Snake, this is actually unique. I'm going to pick this one because this one you won't have seen before. Hit your foe from afar, your next melee attack deals an additional 1d4 fire damage. Uses an action and a key point, and also itself does 1d10 fire damage. This is Thunder Wave, that doesn't need any extra explanation, I don't think. I'm going to actually have to reload and pick some of these different spells to show you. Fist of Unbroken Air, it's a range of 30 feet, 3d10 bludgeoning damage. That's pretty awesome. Push the target back 20 feet and knock it prone if it fails a strength saving throw. But you only do the full 3d10 if they do fail that strength saving throw. So if you want to be aware of the 4 elements, you really want your wisdom to be quite high. So you can see that when I made my monk, I actually put my wisdom up to 16 and dumped intelligence and charisma. Bishop of the Gale Spirits, this is the same as the level 2 spell. Shaping of the Ice, this is unique. Create a climbable ice cube. Alright, we'll check that out in a second. This is just the Thunder Chromatic Orb. Burning Hands, similar to Shock and Grasp, except 1d10 lightning damage instead of 1d8. And then another unique one, Water Whip, which is pretty much the opposite to Fist of Unbroken Air in the sense that it pulls the target towards you and knocks them prone rather than pushing them, and is instead of a strength saving throw is a dexterity saving throw, but is still the same amount of damage. So I'm going to go play about with these in camp. Now you do recover your key points on a short rest, and I found myself pretty much allowing myself to use up all my key points and then short rest afterwards. I will say later on in Act 1 there are some items and abilities that let you recover key points also, apart from just using a short rest. So at these lower levels, I've got 4 key points. It's not a huge amount, but a short rest is very quick and easy to do, especially if you've got a bard in your party. You can take an extra short rest. Anyway, let's start with Fist of Unbroken Air. The range is 30 feet. It's pretty good, considering you're normally a melee class. I think that looks cool as well. Fangs of the Fire Snake. Let's go to turn-based mode just to make sure we see all the effects properly. And then I can, if I really want to, use Flurry of Blows afterwards to do even more damage. Now the one downside about using the training dummy is we don't really get to see the damage properly. And then Shaping of the Ice. There's some ice, and I can climb on it. It's got some vulnerabilities, some resistances, but it creates a block of ice, which is kind of cool. So it's the next day, and sadly, ice has crumbled. So at this low level of 3, key cost is a tiny bit high. But as we level up and get more key, and extra ways of recovering key from items, and eventually class abilities, I'm not worrying about the key cost too much. Yeah, the main downside I feel is that if I'm using Fist of Unbroken Air, I'm not going to be using my main weapon attack, which at level 3 and 4 isn't so bad. But when we get to level 5, and we get some kind of cool items to attack with, I'm probably going to be wanting to use that more. So here we are, Water Whip. Let's have a look at Touch of the Storm and Rush of the Gale Spirits. So here we have Water Whip. Now I want to use this on a real. So I'm going to use this on, let's say... Ooh, no, it's not. Good boy scratch, let's say Gale. I saved it. Anyway, so I've used up some key points. And as aware of the 4 elements, we can, once per long rest, it's not a huge amount, regain half your key points, rounded down. So that's going to help a little bit, and as you get to higher and higher levels, it's going to help a lot, actually. Anyway, that's enough of where the 4 elements for now. Let's go on to the next subclass. It's a Way of the Open Hand. So we get Flurry of Blows, Topple. So on top of having your Flurry of Blows, you can knock someone prone. Potentially, they'll have to fail a dexterity saving throw first. We can stagger them, which means they can't take reactions. Or we can push them if we want to a bit like with Thunderwave or something. Now, when I've been playing, I've been using Tadpole quite a lot first. Oh, sorry, Karlak. Because when they fail their dexterity saving throw, if they fail a dexterity saving throw, they fall prone, which then does mean your next attacks against them have advantage. So as way of the open hand, if I'm focusing on an enemy, like there's a boss, up until level 6, or level 5, up until level 5, we'll get to that later, Tadpole's a really good choice because it gives you advantage on your next attacks, and any attacks of any other melee combatants nearby. If you're trying to get away, stagger can be okay, but you maybe just want to disengage anyway, or you want to push them. But this is about damage. This is about kind of battlefield control, knocking people prone, pushing them away, or being able to allow your characters to walk past without them getting opportunity attacks. Alright, we have Shadow. Big thing here kind of is being able to create darkness. Now, it's not that useful because you can't see in the darkness, at least not these early levels. But it can block off line of sight, give you some of your allies to hide, and you can hide with a bonus action. I'm not a huge... I mean, but hiding as a bonus action is great, but I do feel like monks have a lot of choices for their bonus action. Most of the time, I prefer just to get 2 extra attacks in with, let's say, Flurry of Blows, than to hide. But it depends on the situation. Maybe the situation calls for it, in which case, for monks, Wear the Shadow is the only way to go. Being able to give Dark Vision to someone, I think that's quite good, because cast this once, use up 2 key points, you replenish them back on a short rest. It's all good. And I do want to point out that these other 2 subclasses don't get the same thing that the Way of the Four Elements did. We don't have something extra currently to get us back our key points, or half our key points. Pass Without Trace, I've not really needed a reason to use this yet, because we can see sneaking cones and we can hide outside of the sneaking cones. But if you do want to be passing through a vision cone, then actually Pass Without Trace is amazing, as is Darkness, because it blocks off line of sight. I would say this is more about utility outside of combat than inside of combat at this level anyway. Right, let's level up. Let's get to level 4. Have a look at some good choices. You get Slow Fall, which means we get resistance to falling damage, which is different to 5th edition, which can let you reduce damage by a number of times by your monk level. But here it's just resistance, so it's a little bit different. So rounding off your dexterity and or wisdom is always going to be a good choice. However, if you're in a situation like myself, and we have got an odd score on dexterity, you could put it up to 19 and hope there's another way to get dexterity up to 20. Or you can pick some other things that are very, very good for monks. One is Athlete. Now, in early access, Athlete was pretty crap, let's be honest. It just had this, right? It uses only 5 feet of movement speed to get up from prone. But they've added something. Your jump distance also increases by 50%. That's quite big. So even at strength 10, I can now jump 23 feet. And there's an item that can increase your jump distance as well. So if you've got a higher strength monk, this is really, really good. So when you use this with something like Step of the Wind Dash, or Disengage if you want to, especially Dash, you can jump so far around the battlefield. I chose this first, and I was really glad I did. Other ones for rounding off our dexterity. I mean, you could pick lightly armored. Even putting on a helmet that is light armor, it counts as wearing light armor. Putting on gloves that are light armor counts as wearing light armor. I would generally avoid this. Lucky Luck is going to be good for everybody. But that doesn't round off our dexterity. This is the one we're looking for at the moment. Mobile's fine, but there's no dexterity. But quite interestingly, Weapon Master. Now, I have respect my monk at some point when I was playing, and I actually did this the second time round. Why would you do this? Well, perhaps you didn't pick a race that gives you lots of weapon proficiencies, and now we can round off our dexterity. Awesome. And pick Battle Axe. I'd say Hand Crossbow isn't such a bad choice either. Longsword, wherever it's gone. Maybe Longbow. Maybe Morningstar. Morningstars are pretty good. Rapier. I'm personally going to go for ones that are higher damaging. Flail's fine as well. In terms of rounding off your dexterity, those are the only feats that can do that. Other decent feats. Alert is good. Gain a +5 bonus to initiative and can't be surprised. So you're going to be going early in pretty much every combat. Charger I would probably avoid because you're using your bonus action to do other things a lot of the time. I guess you could pick Defensive Duelist, but you do have to be using a finesse weapon, not a monk weapon. Monk weapons are not necessarily finesse. Yes, we can use our dexterity, but it doesn't say those weapons gain the finesse property. Okay, they just become monk weapons, and this here doesn't say monk weapons. So a rapier is fine, but a quarterstaff isn't fine because a quarterstaff is not finesse. Could use this, I suppose. Dual wielder, maybe. I'd probably avoid it because we do want our dexterity to be as high as possible, to be honest. If you want to round off constitution, I'd say durable is a very good feat. Regaining full hit points when you take a short rest is very powerful, especially as a melee class, someone who's going to be taking a lot of damage. Elemental adepts I'd probably avoid even as Way of the Four Elements. Great Weapon Master, we're not using any great weapons. Mage Slayer, it's a bit too situational. Yes, enemies do cast spells. Yes, your monk will be standing next to enemies, but it doesn't mean the enemies you're standing next to are the ones who are going to be casting spells. So it's a bit hit and miss, but it is some extra utility, versatility that you wouldn't have otherwise. Magic Initiates, perhaps. If you want to have spellcasting but don't want to be Way of the Four Elements, this is one way to do it. The cantrips, there aren't a huge number of useful cantrips, I'd say, for a monk. Light can be good. Maybe Blade Ward, if you can cast it ahead of combat. Friends, maybe Mage Hand. As for spells, pick what you want. I mean, my monk here doesn't have a good charisma, so I wouldn't pick one that actually affects enemies. But Longstrider can be good. Heroism doesn't depend on your charisma. Neither does Sleep. But you've got to remember, if you're casting these in combat, it means you're not attacking with your weapon attacks, and that's kind of what monks are all about. So you do have to pick very carefully. And the same goes for all of the magic initiates. You've got to look out for what spellcasting modifier is used. So clerics and druids could be okay if you do want to have something like inflict wounds, but by the time you get into higher and higher levels, something like inflict wounds isn't that great. I'd probably rather just attack twice and not have to use up one spell. So do keep in mind when you're picking these magic initiates, now that we're outside of early access, this lasts until you're level 12. Some of these, such as Cure Wounds, aren't really that good at level 12. Bless is always going to be good though, you know? Could be not such a bad choice. And Druids, actually Guidance and Resistance, maybe not such a bad choice, because those have utility outside of combat. Maybe Jump, or Enhanced Leap, as they've put here. Longstrider, Create Water, Speak with Animals. Again, I'm looking for utility really, not for damage, because damage is going to come from our weapon attacks. Potentially might pick up Magic Initiate Sorcerer or Wizard for shields, but you'll only be able to cast this once per long rest. Is it really worth it? I personally don't think so. I think it's a cool idea. The fact it's once per long rest doesn't really sell it to me. From Warlock, yes, we've got Hex here, but it uses a bonus action, which means we're losing probably two of our attacks. I do find myself spending a lot of key points to do Flurry of Blows to get all the extra attacks and damage out, which means I can't use Hex. Martial Adept, I'd mostly avoid because it's a single superiority dice. I mean, these are cool. These are good. Once per short rest. Mobile, yes. What are you on over that though? Mobile's a good one. We're probably not going to be using polearms, although we do have a quarterstaff, could have a spear. But this bonus attack is kind of pointless because we're going to be doing unarmed attacks. It's a waste, really. Resilient, yeah. Resilient's never a bad choice if you want to get maybe proficiency in wisdom saving throws, especially if you want to round off your wisdom instead of your dexterity. This is a very strong choice. Ritual Caster, maybe not a bad choice to get Longstrider and Jump. Or one of the other spells if you want one of the other spells, of course. Savage Attacker, when making weapon attacks, roll your damage dice twice and use the highest result. Roughly half of our attacks are actually unarmed, so we won't be able to use this. So it's not so great. Sentinel by itself, I mean, we will be next to plenty of people, and I have had my monk has had a fair few number of opportunity attacks. So it's not the worst one to pick. Sharpshooter would probably not using our melee weapon very much. Shield Master, I would avoid because we shouldn't really be wearing a shield. Skilled if you want extra proficiency in three more skills. Spell Sniper, would not usually using spells. Maybe Wear the Four Elements perhaps. But yeah, I would avoid this because most of the spells that we have from Wear the Four Elements are actually saving throws, not attack rolls. Tavern Brawler doesn't work particularly well, even if you think it should do. Strength modifiers added twice to the damage and attack rolls. But we're using our dexterity, our unarmed attacks. But maybe if you want to make a strength monk, that'd be fine. Tough if you want extra hit points. I'd probably go for higher constitution though to get higher constitution saving throws. Warcast I would avoid, and Weapon Master I've already covered. There's a lot of feats. I'm actually going to pick up Athlete. So now my jump distance is 23 feet instead of that 15. So if I do go step of the wind dash, each jump is now 23 feet. And I can go very far. For the price of a single key point. Well, looks like we can't jump onto the log particularly well. But this has really saved me in a few combats, I would say. And even exploration, the extra jump distance is really good for getting around. That's as far as I can get. I think for something that replenishes, a single resource that replenishes on a short rest, like key points, I don't think any other class can cover that distance. And later on, monks can cover even more distance because their movement speed goes up. At level 5, all monks get an extra key point, or get an extra attack, so with your action you can now make 2 attacks. And then all monks, this is Way of the Open Hand, but this has not, what we're doing here has nothing to do with that. What we get here is Stunning Strike Melee, possibly stuns a target. You have to make a Constitution saving throw against your spell save DC, which is going to be 8, plus your proficiency modifier, which at level 5 will now be 3, so it's 11, plus your wisdom modifier, which for this monk is plus 3. So the spell save DC hasn't been updated here, is actually going to be 14, let's accept that. So some of the maths is off here, it's showing 13, it really, 8 plus 3 plus 3 is 14. And since we've got 2 attacks with our action, we can actually use this twice. But every time you hit, whether the enemy is successful or not, it does use up a key point. So I'm going to go find someone to go and stun. So those of you that played early access will probably recognise this area. Let's have a look at this. Right. Yeah, Stunning Strike Melee. We've got Stunning Strike Unarmed. At the moment, our unarmed damage is less than our melee damage, so I've been going with melee. The 70% chance is just the chance to hit. I missed. I didn't use a key point. I started with 6, but I can try again. Yeah, it worked. Brilliant. So we can see here the saving throw DC is 14 as I calculated earlier. So they are now stunned. They'll miss their next turn. They can't take actions, bonus actions, or reactions. And I can still, if I want to, use something like Stagger, be a bit silly. And also, since they're stunned, we do get advantage. Now, I'm level 5, they're level 4. It's a little bit unfair, really. Let's go push them. Hopefully. And they're gone. Any monk can use Stunning Strike. I would say it's very powerful.
Why am I doing this?
So powerful, in fact. Last haste on this guy. Just to show you that we can get 2 more goes. Now, going against the Mask of Vengeance. Well, yeah. Stun them. Don't need to use it again. There's no point. You can just attack again. Yeah, I miss. Whatever. Anyway, Stunning Strike is really, really powerful. I'd say if you've got a boss, just spam it. Who cares how many key points you've got? You can just short rest afterwards. And now, since I'm hasted especially, this is very unfair.
Swift as my
And then let's do this. Bam, bam. Right, now any martial class is going to do very well when they're hasted. But I do love the Stunning Strike, and personally, Blow of Blows topple. Get advantage if I need to in the future, or stagger if I need to run away. Anyway, that's level 5. Level 5 is awesome. Yeah, we come to level 6. And I did get to level 6 in Act 1, but I didn't get any higher. So this is the last level I'll cover in this video, but I will be covering more things afterwards. So we get more ki, we get slightly more movement, an extra 5 feet. Ki empowered strikes, your unarmed attacks count as magical for the purposes of overcoming enemies' resistances and immunities to non-magical damage. This is important because I have come up against enemies already that are resistant to non-magical damage. We also get a subclass feature, so this 3 here are all from Way of the Open Hand. And that's from here, which is why I'm saying Way of the Open Hand is really about damage, because you can choose to add 1d4 plus 1 damage to your unarmed attacks. Whether it's necrotic, psychic, or radiant damage is up to you. That's a massive power boost. This doesn't come in 5th edition at all. We also get wholeness of body, so we get some healing, and you regain half your key points. Brilliant, a bit like Way of the 4 Elements. And you enter a temporary state of wholeness, so you have to do this kind of just before you go into combat, or maybe during combat, where you regain key points and have an extra bonus action, so you become like a thief. I haven't tested it out because I haven't got to a high enough level yet, but I imagine if you were a thief, monk, multiclass, you could have 3 bonus actions on those turns. Not only can you do Flurry of Blows Stagger as a Way of the Open Hand, you also get to add to those 2 blows this extra damage, and if you've just used Wholeness of Body, you can do that twice in a turn, but it only lasts 3 turns, so it's not, this isn't even for a whole fight necessarily. So to turn on the extra damage, you need to go to the Passives tab, And just pick whichever one you want. You can't do more than one, but let's say I picked Manifestation of the Soul, Radiant damage. Now Will's a bit unfortunate here, he's only got 31 hit points, he's only level 4. Got 7 key points now, I'd say that's quite a lot. And here's the wholeness of body. That's what I can do. Let's try and topple him. Ooh, a critical hit and a critical miss. You win some, you lose some, eh? And like I said, as an orc, my offhand attack, my unarmed attacks didn't get an extra critical damage die. I did get to roll an extra 1d4. Sorry, earlier I said 1d4 plus 1 damage. It's 1d4 plus your wisdom modifier. Apologies. Now let's say I did this. I want to get my key points back. Here's my extra bonus action. I can go and do that if I wanted to. Obviously, that's not good for Will, but it's very powerful indeed. We're getting an extra 1d4 plus wisdom modifier damage to every unarmed attack. That's brilliant. And the fact that we can even change the type of damage we're doing is very important. Right, I now need to go and speak to Withers. As I'm going through this is where the 4 elements, I do want to point out that as you level up, you can, let's say, take out one spell and replace it with another one in the list. And at level 5 we do get an extra spell. And that are some extra choices. So now we've got essentially Hold Person, Scorching Ray, and Shatter. What it comes down to. I would say the Hold Person equivalent is, if it works, is good. Problem is, your spell save DC might not be very high. It kind of depends on how you've built your monk. If it's not, then this isn't going to work a lot of the time. If it does work, it'll be damn good. Right, the only person I've got in camp I can actually use this on. Oh no, I've got another person over here. Right. Sorry, Volo. Just want to show you Bench of the North Wind. But of course, passed, I've got to keep trying. I do want to point out this uses an action. Alright, so I've started problems, but this is just for the sake of the video. So, having cast Hold Person, hopefully I don't fall over. Sorry, Scratch. Oh yes, that used my action. Combat is a bit different now, I'll have to cover that in another video. But when someone is held, attacks against them are automatically critical hits. This is why it's powerful, but it does use up your action. So if you don't have a particularly high wisdom, I personally would avoid the save or suck spells. I mean, they're great when they work. Unless you've got some way of decreasing the enemy's wisdom saving throw, which there are ways. Right, I'm going to pretend like this didn't happen. And go and load. At level 5 for Way of the Shadow, sorry I didn't go through this at level 5. We do also get an action Cloak of the Shadows. Wrap yourself in shadows to become invisible if you are obscured. So as long as you're not inside bright light, you can be invisible. It says 10 turns, but you can just cast it again. I'll show you it in a second. Then at level 6 for Way of the Shadow, Shadow Step. As a bonus action, you can teleport from shadow to shadow, afterwards you have advantage on your next melee attack roll. Pretty awesome. So how do we know if you are obscured? Well, if you hold down Shift near your cursor, you can see what looks a bit like a sun. So where I'm standing right now, it's got like a half-filled sun, which means it is slightly obscured. And we can see that we can actually use Cloak of Shadows. We don't need to use a key point, there's no resource, like once per short rest or anything, we can just use it. But if I walk towards an area, let's say over here, where it's like a full sun, I'll become visible again. If you go into hiding, you can permanently see whether you're in lightly obscured or in full view. If you're not hiding, if you hold down Shift, you can see these vision cones. I'm going to go back into hiding. I would actually advise... So now we can jump around. In combat, this is useful, but you won't necessarily be able to use it in every combat, because you do need to teleport from a shadow to a shadow. For example, over there, towards where Astarion and Barker's route are, I actually can't, because the area isn't lightly or heavily obscured. I can teleport to anywhere else. So basically when you're teleporting, it'll let you know where you can and can't teleport to. You can't accidentally teleport to somewhere where you'll become visible completely. I'd say this is very useful outside of combat, really useful for getting around. Again, there's not shadows everywhere, but I can just jump across this light bit. And I can use it with impunity, as long as I'm going to somewhere that is actually lightly or heavily obscured. So it's a very quick way of getting around. and I can do it while invisible. So this is really cool. During combat, I'd use this more for positioning than anything else. Giving up your bonus action for advantage on a single attack, I'd say it's debatable whether it's worth trying to get that to happen every time. Personally, I'd usually rather get 2 flurry of blows off. So I get 2 attacks, which I could crit with both. Well, it's unlikely, right? But I can do damage with both. And if we're outside, then it's actually going to be a bit more difficult. Let's go to, I don't know. There are quite a lot of places that are in shadow. Usually where you see some actual shadow on the ground will give you somewhere to teleport to. So, you know, if you're getting around, it's not that bad. You don't have to be invisible to use it. But if you're trying to explore somewhere new, I would advise it. When I'm making videos in the future, I might actually pick Where the Shadow for getting around the game a bit more quickly. So I'm going to go over some items which you've all found within Act 1. If you don't want to be spoiled for items, just look away now. Come back later. I will have timestamps in the video. So look at this. Armor class 19. Pretty cool. Because I've got 18 dexterity, 16 wisdom. And found very early on inside the Druid's Grove. And by the way, all the vendors have got loads of new items. So many. Braces of defense. Gain +2 bonus to armor class. As long as you're not wielding armor or holding a shield. Oh, look at that. I'm a monk. I'm not going to be wearing armor or holding a shield, probably. So specifically for monks. This is an old one. That was in early access. Blood Guzzler Garb. And then when an enemy damages the wearer, you gain Wrath for 1 turn. You do one extra bonus damage with melee weapons, so not your unarmed attack. It's alright. There aren't very many choices in Act 1 for your chest armor piece. I mean, necklaces aren't the strong suit for monks in Act 1. Maybe you want the Amulet of Saloon Chosen to get a bit of extra healing. This was found in the Underdark. I'm a trader, in fact. I just bought this. Amulet of Restoration. Gives you 1 use of Healing Word per long rest and 1 use of Mass Healing Word. But I didn't have to give that to the monk. Maybe you want advantage on death saving throws. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Speak with Dead. Lesser Restoration. A lot of the time I spent going around with the Silver Pendant, which was in early access. Gives you guidance as a cantrip. These boots were amazing. These came from the Goblin Camp. Jump distance is increased by 5 feet. Acrobatics 1. So my jump distance, even though I've only got 10 strength, it's 28 feet. And Latel, with 17 currently in strength, 25 feet. Let's just level her up. So even though my strength is 10, my equivalent jump distance is as if I'm strength 18, which I think is really awesome. Rings, I gave him the Ring of Jumping. This is a bit of a strange ring because actually you cast jump using a bonus action. Normally it's an action to cast it, which means if you're in combat, you can't actually cast this and then jump in the same turn, which is a bit frustrating actually. Other rings, we've got the usual ones that we've had. Crusher's Ring would be good. Bought this ring as well from a trader, didn't find it anywhere. Your weapon attacks also deal 2 acid damage. Again, wouldn't and doesn't apply to your unarmed attacks, but still pretty cool. Maybe the Spurred Band, bit of extra movement speed if you're below 50% hit points. Maybe one of the rings that gives like poison resistance or lightning resistance. The helmet, there isn't very much. A lot of them do require light armor proficiency, but the haste helmet or the warped headband of intellect, I'd say, were top choices. I feel like my stat spread is now pretty good, apart from my charisma. But if I stick on the haste helm, which doesn't require light armor proficiency, I get an extra 10 movement speed for 3 turns in combat. I'd say that's pretty good. For weapons, I don't use the ranged attack very much, but just having this equipped, even if I'm not using it, do get advantage against monstrosity type enemies, which come up every now and again, and you get Hunter's Mark if you want to use it. So if I'm out of key points, sometimes I actually use Hunter's Mark instead. And then the melee weapon, right, I'm sticking with quarterstaves here. So you'll come across Corellin's Grace, which was in early access in the Druid Grove. Just buy it, wasn't too expensive, and it's changed a bit. So Corellin's Grace, while the wielder is not wearing armor, which monks don't tend to, +2 bonus to saving throws, that's really, really good. And a +1 bonus to unarmed attack rolls and damage. So basically your fists kind of become like +1 weapons. So instead of doing 1d6 damage, 1d6 plus dexterity damage, we do 1d6 plus dexterity +1. So had that for a lot of Act 1, and then I tried out Morning Frost, and I'm glad I did. I don't particularly care about dealing cold damage. The wielder deals an additional 1 cold damage. That's okay. That's a +1 damage essentially. Possibly chills the target, so they're vulnerable to cold damage. So the great thing is, this weapon does 1d8, well, we are holding it with 2 hands, plus dexterity, +1, it's a +1 weapon, plus 1d4 cold damage. So if I go try this out on, say, Karnak. Oh, that was maximum damage there. I did one, okay, 1d4. Plus 1 damage. So this increases your damage output by a nice amount. And then let's just use Flurry of Blows just to show you. Alright, it doesn't apply to your unarmed attacks. It is just the attacks with the staff itself. So we can see here, I'm actually okay. Again, I rolled particularly well. Here, I didn't roll particularly well down here. Your average damage actually starts going up quite a lot with this. And on top of that, if you're way of the open hand, you can then do extra damage with your unarmed attacks and actually outputting a fair bit of damage. And lastly, Tadpoles. So if you're okay using your Tadpole powers, I'm just going to point out a few good ones for a monk. So your first attack roll or ability check you make against a target gains a bonus equal to proficiency bonus. Awesome. Let's take that one. When you make a successful attack roll against a foe, you can change it into critical hit. Awesome. We're going to be making loads of attack rolls. Force Tunnel maybe helps you get around, but you have got other ways of doing that. Creature suffering falling damage because of your actions take an additional 1d8 damage. If you wear the open hand, or you've got the Thunder Wave, effectively the Thunder Wave spell from Way of the Four Elements, that's awesome. The Pulse is really good. It knocks everything back. I might also go for Cull the Weak, another passive ability. Which to get to, we have to go through this one. So when you bring a creature down to fewer hit points than your number of evolved illithid powers, it dies, and all nearby creatures take 1d4 psychic damage. And if you're investing lots into your monk, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, once they get to below like 7 hit points, it's going to start doing extra damage. Right, where is... Can't bring myself to go and do it to scratch. So here's luck at the far round, so I can turn it into a critical hit. Boom. Or maybe I will. Sorry, Scratch. Don't hate me, everyone. Can if you want. Down he goes. Right. I wouldn't advise it, but if you're facing off a horde of enemies, this is actually going to be quite good. So, Scratch is fine. Don't worry. Don't worry. That's covered everything I've been able to get done with the monk before the game is released. Overall, I would certainly say the monk has been upgraded from 5th edition. Every subclass has received some treatment to make it slightly better. I especially like the Way of the Open Hand, personally. I like having that extra damage, but I do like that they've added extra key to everybody, and I really do like the teleporting around of Way of the Shadow. It's actually going to be really, really useful, especially if you're going to be playing the game again after a few times. You just want to get through somewhere quickly. Teleporting around is going to be probably the way to go. So thank you very much for watching. I know it's been a bit of a long one, but there's been a lot to show off for the monk. Let me know if you will now try and play the monk, whether you're still not convinced by me, or whether you're still put off from the class, or it's never been your thing, because, you know, not everyone likes the idea of monks, and that's absolutely fine. And let me know your monk build. What race you're going to pick, what stats have you got, what spells have you chosen if you've got Wear the Four Elements. Thank you very much to all the members of my channel. If you made it this far, please do consider subscribing, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.